Yo, how you doing? How's it going? Today, I'm going to talk about how I pieced together some of the designs for my cosplay that I prepared. Over the last weekend, my very good friend and I went to MEGACON in Orlando. It's my very first comic convention that I've ever been to, and I've never done cosplay before, so this was a first for me. And it was a perfect opportunity for me to stretch the old creative muscles and try something new. So I'm going to explain how I turned this thing right here, my old Kaide, into this. This mask looked nothing like this whenever I first bought it. It was just plain and solid black. It also had these little carabiners on the side as kind of cyberpunk-ish sort of ears. I was going to reinstall them, but I ended up leaving them off because I felt like it worked fine without it. But you can never have enough carabiners anyway, so I'm not complaining. This mask also had a whole other portion that sits on the top and kind of wraps around the wearer's head, but I ended up taking this part off because I was going to have a hat that covered the top of my head and this would have gotten in the way. This was also not the first mask that I got. Originally, I got this mask. I do not recommend it. It ended up being way too small. The mouth nose portion and the visor were separate. The drill holes on the visor were not drilled properly, so this did not actually fit on here no matter how I tried. Ended up returning it. This one was much better, and it ended up covering way more of my face and looking better and fitting in with the look I was going for. So I was much happier with this one. Let me just give a little bit of background into some of the thinking that was going on in my brain as I was piecing this together. My friend who I was going to MEGACON with was cosplaying as a Jedi, kind of a gray Jedi sort of thing. And I was thinking it would be cool if I went as a Sith, but I've always really liked the allusions to like the samurai and ancient Japanese culture. Obviously Star Wars is very much influenced by both medieval feudalistic culture and Japanese feudalistic culture. I wanted to do a samurai themed Sith, so to speak. And a lot of times in fantasy and real life armor, there's all kinds of little ornate details and flourishes and scrolls and all kinds of things because humans like to decorate stuff, even our armor and weapons, especially our armor and weapons. And what I like so much about that decorative ornate look, specifically on something like armor or weapons, is that it just gives it this regal, royal kind of look. It makes it feel like it was crafted by artisan millennia ago. It has been passed down from generation to generation as a priceless heirloom of a royal family. My original idea was to just draw the designs onto the mask itself. I tested it out, in fact, on this little piece on the inside here using a gold paint marker. I quickly decided that freehanding was probably actually not going to be the best decision. So I ended up buying a stencil. I didn't even realize at the time that I was buying a stencil set that was specifically meant for drawing blueprints for like houses and buildings, which would probably explain why there's a toilet-shaped one here. But I decided that drawing them on probably actually wasn't going to be the best idea because if I make a mistake while I'm drawing it on there, it's going to be very hard for me to erase that mistake. And I didn't want to necessarily ruin the mask. And so it dawned on me, I can use adhesive vinyl, basically just a giant sticker sheet. And you can cut out shapes either with scissors or an X-Acto knife or a CNC machine, as I will show later. And then you can essentially make decals and stickers and things like that. And I knew that going the route of making a decal meant that it allowed a little bit more room for error, which was nice, while also allowing me to be able to create something that was a bit more precise. Next thing I had to do was actually draw the designs themselves. To do that, I decided to make some templates in Adobe Illustrator that I could draw on and then transplant those designs onto this mask. I was very fortunate that with this mask, all of the shapes are essentially very flat 2D planes with relatively little curvature to them. It also does help that this mask is already kind of separated naturally into a bunch of separate panels, because then that meant I could design each piece separately and apply it separately. So what did I do to get that into Illustrator? Well, first, I used my handy dandy mobile tripod here. I placed my phone, the one that I'm currently using to record this video, right here in the tripod holder. My goal was to get as good of reference images of this mask as I possibly could, which meant that the mask needed to be as level as possible so that I could get a straight on photos of each little panel. So I took a bunch of pictures, very carefully laying the mask in a bunch of different angles. I then imported each of those photos into Illustrator. I went back to my mask and I used my handy dandy little precision ruler and I measured every single edge of each of these different panels. With those measurements, I then created a bunch of individual line segments, as you can see here in red. So once I had all of these individual line segments that I knew were the exact lengths that they needed to be, I rotated them and placed them into position based on my reference image here, and then joined them all together into a solid shape. What I was left with was essentially a template that I could use to draw my designs on. I then printed that out and got to work. So I decided to try drawing out some designs just without really looking up any inspiration first, just to see what was naturally kind of coming out of my brain. I kind of wanted to have a sort of blend of mechanical, geometric type shapes, but also very ornate and decorative type shapes. And that essentially landed me with something like this. And I realized that whenever you kind of blend a mechanical, geometric sort of look with a very ornate, decorative sort of look, you basically end up with like a tribal design, which wasn't exactly what I was going for, but it was good for me to at least explore this to understand where I was going wrong. So instead of blending these two styles, what I realized I needed to do was actually do them each separately rather than trying to blend them into one style. So again, first draft material. Once I at least had this basic design down, I ended up cutting up all these pieces and I actually placed them onto the mask itself so that I could see how it would come along. But it dawned on me how it was looking more tribal than what I really wanted it to look. I wanted to have that ornate, decorative, floral type look specifically. And then through some research, I realized that there is actually a style, one style out there called Sheridan. If you've ever done any leatherworking, you're probably very familiar with that because apparently it's very common in leatherworking. But essentially, this type of artwork involves drawing flowers and lots of circles and connecting all those circles with vines and scrolls and things. But there's a kind of formula for how to do it. And I watched a bunch of tutorials on how to do that. So I'll let you see some of the drafts. So this was draft number 1, right? Not exactly what I was going for. This is draft number 2, very basic, very unfinished. This was after I had started to look up Sheridan style, which is basically using flowers filled in with this kind of circular shape. And then there's a certain method for drawing all the different scrolls and the patterns around it. This is very rough. This is before I truly understood what I was doing. This was my 3rd draft. As you can see, it's starting to look a little bit better. I'm starting to get a better sense of how to make things flow, but I'm still kind of not really understanding how to utilize negative space, and I'm kind of just filling in everything with blobs and shapes. This is a little bit better. I'm starting to kind of get the hang of it. It was about that point that I realized I wanted to have some sort of seal or like other little geometric bits that sat within the design. So in Illustrator, I actually went in and designed a bunch of little versions where I have different little seals, things that I wanted to test out, and then I printed that out as separate templates that had a very faint image that I could use as a reference for drawing some of these more exact geometric bits that would be a little bit too hard to freehand accurately. And so with that in mind, I went on to the next draft. And this is where I'm really starting to understand how to connect things, how to use negative space more appropriately, and how to have a proper flow from every little piece to another. I was also trying to see where I can incorporate things like little different Star Wars imagery and things like that. If you played in the Old Republic games, then you know where this is from. That's kind of like a combo icon, but I knew I wanted to incorporate some things like that in there as well. And so I decided to basically do a more in-depth draft of everything, and this would serve as the base artwork for the final version. Still quite rough. As you can see, this is why that template was so helpful, because I was able to draw out the more precise shapes here. At this point, I was really starting to nail down kind of the Sheridan artwork a little bit more and understand how to make things flow a bit better and maintain some level of consistency between each piece. I then made a photocopy of this design and did a more precise inking with good old Faber-Castell pens here, and that allowed me to have a much more high contrast image that I could import into Illustrator so that it would be easier for me to turn into vectors. Again, this is a bit more of what I was hoping for, where instead of kind of combining the geometric and flourish things into a single style, I have them separately where I'm just doing the ornate stuff, but also doing separate little geometric things. So I scanned and imported my final design into Illustrator and started making each of these shapes into actual vectors. If you are familiar with Illustrator, you know the name of the game. You are using a pen tool to draw your anchor points, and then you're using your good old anchor point tool to adjust all the Bezier curves. So the first pass looked like this, and this is just me actually placing all of my anchor points. And anytime I'm vectoring artwork, I'm essentially working working with 2 rules of thumb. Rule 1 is never use more points than what's necessary to be able to create a shape, because fewer points will always be easier to manage. And 2, anytime that there's a curve, place points at the relative noon, 6, 3, and 9 positions. You technically only need 4 points to create a circle. So in any given curve, you should never need more than 4 points to create that curve. So that's why even on a curve like this, I have a point kind of at this 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, noon, and 3. And that gives me all the points that I need to create this curve. Now, right now, it looks like a jagged nightmare, but we would of course go back and then add in all of the adjustments to the Bezier curve and basically do that for everything, finish the rest of the owl, and what you end up with are shapes like this. Nice, smooth curves. And so essentially, I repeated that process for all of the pieces of this mask here. This is very painstaking. I am torturing myself. And once I was done, I was left with this. So once I had the designs done, I had to figure out how to actually cut them out of the vinyl. Originally, I thought I was just going to do it with an X-Acto knife. I quickly learned that was a bad idea, because all of these designs are just way too small in detail to try to be cutting out manually. I learned through some more research that apparently you can buy personal CNC machines. There's multiple brands out there. The one that I got was called Cricut, specifically the Cricut Explore Air 2. How this works is you have one of these guys, which is a little adhesive mat. You cut out a piece of vinyl, and essentially this is just a big sticker that you could peel off, but you don't want to do that just yet. You place that onto your mat and it will hold and stick on there really well. It's not doing that now because I have this little adhesive protective on there. You use this mat to hold the adhesive down and feed that into the machine. This mat then goes in and out this way while this mechanism goes side to side, and that basically gives you your XY coordinates so that you can cut out any shape that you want, and it uses a very fine little blade to do so. Once that design is all cut out, you peel your adhesive off of that grip mat, and what you are left with is a piece of vinyl or whatever material you're using that has the exact perfect little shapes that you need to cut out. This is just a test piece, which is why this looks like garbage right now. Once you have your designs, you peel off the unwanted portions so that all you're left with is the white backing paper with the designs that you want to keep. On top of that, it's called weeding whenever you get rid of all the little bits that you don't need. Then you have to use what's called transfer tape, and you place it onto your design, and that transfer tape allows you to peel your designs off of the backing paper and then transfer that to your final item. And essentially that's how you end up with this. All of these lovely, precise little decals that adhere oh so nice and just give that polished look. And this is how the final thing looks. I wasn't really too concerned about how the top of my head was gonna look because I knew I had a hat to cover that up. So while doing this, I knew I wanted to try this type of design and application on other pieces of my cosplay. One of those other items that I decided to decorate was this pauldron right here. Got it off of Amazon and basically went through a somewhat shortened version of that exact same process. I say shortened only because I decided not to do the custom Sheridan style drawing on every little panel of this pauldron because I only have one lifetime and that would have taken about 3.5 lifetimes to complete. So I just created each of these individual designs in Illustrator. Oh, and just a quick shout out real quick. Highly recommend this company, if you're looking for any quality faux leather cosplay armor. I tried out multiple brands that were not as good, and so far everything that I've gotten from them is top notch. The leather material is very thick and it's all very well built. I also got some arm bracers for them that went super well with the costume, and I plan on doing a more in-depth video where I actually walk through the entire process that I did for this as well. So if anyone's interested in actually seeing an in-depth walkthrough of me creating designs for this or any other future pieces that I add, let me know. So sometimes in various cosplay and fantasy armor, you'll see something that looks a little bit like this. Basically, it's a loincloth. But I think the official term for it is a scapular. I don't know, my friend and I were just calling it a nut cloth. From what I understand, it doesn't really exist in like actual real life armor. It's more of like a religious or ceremonial type of garment. And if you see it in armor. It's mostly just like fantasy stuff and video games and things like that. A cheap roll of this faux leather from Amazon in a roll, and I cut that up. And then this was the design that I created for that. Unfortunately, because I was running into issues with the Cricut machine, I ended up having to piece all of this together as a bunch of separate pieces as opposed to one or two big pieces. But I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So basically my belt was right here and everything from here below was dangling between my legs. Again, much like the pauldron, I decided not to go all out and do all of the custom Sheridan artwork on the scapular here because I can only torture myself so much on any one given creative project. But I was able to reuse some of the design language from the different elements that I already created so far. So this little kind of seal that I created on my mask, I essentially just turned that 90 degrees and created a more in-depth version of that here with vertical text and some little Jedi messaging in there. I reused that little triangular pattern into the background of this piece, and the same flowers that you see on here are the same ones that I drew for my mask here and the ones that are on the pauldron right here. So there's a couple of little elements like that that are shared throughout each of these different pieces, and I feel that helps maintain some level of consistency between each of the pieces, even though they do kind of have distinct styles a little bit. And the last two items of my cosplay that I was able to customize before the event were these two scabbards that I created out of PVC to house each of my lightsabers. So this entire cylinder of each scabbard is actually covered in black adhesive vinyl, just the same as the gold stuff, just a different color. This is also that black adhesive vinyl that I did on these gold bits that I spray painted. The last bit that I added was these little bits of Arabish, and I decided to name each of my swords after my cats, one of them being Penny and the other one being the Dude. So altogether, no dude, no. So when it was all said and done, I had all of these little pieces here that helped tie everything together. Again, all of it done with this adhesive vinyl right here. I feel that doing all of this helped pull everything together and make for a neat cosplay. Now, there were a bunch of other aspects of piecing this cosplay together that I'm not including in this video, including how I actually built the scabbards and all the different cloth pieces and how I pieced all of that together. So I'm only covering the actual like decal design portion here. But if anyone wants to know a little bit more of how I pieced all the little things together, you know how comments work. So now let's just finish off with some super dramatic, semi-slow zoom-ins on how the final product looks. I'm so glad I was able to get this done in time for the event. MEGACON was so much fun. My friend and I definitely did not anticipate how many people were going to ask to take photos with us. Quite a few people walked up and gave us compliments on our cosplay, and I really appreciate all the kind words. It makes all of the nervous breakdowns worth it. Thanks for watching, and catch you guys next time.